In 1944, the war in Europe was raging on and the whole continent was involved. With the addition of the Americans, the Allied soldiers have managed to get to a stalemate of the Axis powers, and the German war machine is starting to show cracks in the heavy armor. It is now time for the Allies to go on the offensive and go for the victory. More and more soldiers are being sent to the war front and expected to give their lives for the cause of stopping the Nazi expansion. Bombs raining down and the towns turning into rubble, the worst war in history raged on with the sides locked and neither backing down. We pick up the story in the present, with Chris asleep and Richard, his dad, startling him to wake up from his deep sleep in the afternoon. Chris gets testy with his dad, but Richard isn't having it. Later in the kitchen, Karen, his mom, offers Chris some food, but he refuses and she asks Richard what he did, and he tells her that Chris shouldn't be sleeping till noon anyway. Richard is worried that his son isn't taking his life seriously and just sleeping around all day. He wants Chris to join the army, but Chris isn't sure if that's what he wants to do with his life, and Karen is on her son's side because she thinks it's a good idea to have a break before making such a big life decision. Richard, on the other hand, thinks Chris should at least do something while he's here, get a part-time job and help out his parents, at least with some bills. Richard thinks the army is the best path for his son to take, but Karen isn't so on board with it, thinking it is a bad idea to ship off her son to war and put him in danger. Richard always wanted to be a soldier, but was injured, and that's why he wants to send his son to have the life he never could. Later on, Chris is with Jessica, who thinks it's stupid to let a big decision be made this early in their lives. She then suggests talking to this old guy named Hawkeye who lives near them, a veteran who fought in World War II and might have a good insight on Chris's dilemma about joining the army. Down the street, in a small and rundown house, Chris comes up and knocks at the door, but the old guy was getting something from the store when he gets stopped by two younger guys who want to take his bag. He confronts them and cracks a joke that pisses them off, and one of them pulls out a knife and asks for his wallet, but Hawkeye isn't budging. Chris is watching all of this go down, and Hawkeye just kicks one of them down and quickly takes care of the other as well. But when one of them pulls out a gun, Chris kicks it out of his hands just in time. Later on, Hawkeye has Chris in his home and he sees Hawkeye's wife in a photo, and he tells Chris that she passed away 2 years ago. Chris thinks he should call the police, but Hawkeye doesn't care enough to do that. He's only curious about why Chris is here looking for him. Chris is here to learn from Hawkeye, and in turn, Chris agrees to mow the lawn of the house. The next day, Chris is working on the yard as Hawkeye watches on. He later tells Chris that he was drafted into the army and sent to Spain for training under the British commandos. He became a ranger after that and volunteered to become a paratrooper, and with his unit, they became known as the Filthy 13. They were all together in Britain weeks before D-Day. McNasty was their sergeant, a very tough man. There's also Agnew, who's second in command, Frenchie, who has a son, Chuck, Willie, Ragsman, Gugu, Dinty, Lou Lip, Peepnuts, Joey, Max, and finally Hawkeye, who never missed a target. But before he told him any more, Hawkeye stops the story and tells Chris to come back tomorrow with a set of shears if he wants to hear more. The next day, Chris is at home and his mom sits next to him to ask about what he has decided, but he hasn't made a choice yet, and she tells him that some of the most successful people also had no idea what they wanted to do at his age. All she asks is to find the one thing that he is most passionate about, and that everything else will fall into place after he figures that out. Later on, Hawkeye gets a call from his son, who's looking for money after losing everything gambling. He wants to sell Hawkeye's Medal of Honor. That just makes Hawkeye hang up the phone. After the sun rises, Hawkeye is watching Chris work in the trees, and he tells him to relax a bit. Chris asks about D-Day, and Hawkeye answers that the silences are the most memorable thing to him. The guns and bombs are common, but the quiet moments between them are the most scary because all you can hear is your heartbeat and breath. In 1944, the Filthy 13 were jumping out of a plane, landing behind enemy lines with war paint on their faces. They spread out and take cover to wait for the German soldiers to pass by. It's quiet and calm, almost like nothing else is happening, let alone a war. But it was just a farmer and his daughter who's running away from the Germans. But the farmer gets shot. They're in an ambush with German snipers on the trees. A few of them get shot, but they drag the daughter to safety, but still can't escape the sniper until Hawkeye spots and shoots him down. The farmer's daughter is distraught that her father's gone, and they had to calm her down. Hawkeye remembers these memories but hopes he never did because they are very painful, and that makes Chris feel selfish for making him relive them. But Hawkeye is just glad that someone gave him some attention, and as Hawkeye remembers, the crew lost their way and got lost in France. They then found a cabin and decided to look inside. They slowly creep towards the door and make their entrance, but it was just a simple family living there, Arthur and his family. They want to search the house, and Arthur lets them but asks them to be respectful. But then McNasty asked for some tobacco, but they didn't have that, so they just made the soldiers some food that the soldiers appreciated very much. They all love it, but that's just because they've been wandering around without food for days. The woman of the house is feeling uncomfortable about having this many soldiers in the house because, according to Arthur, they haven't had visitors for months, but everyone else is having a good time. But then Arthur mentioned having a visitor the other day, and that made McNasty question his statements as he looks like he's lying. And now all the soldiers are suspicious. They think a bigger secret is hiding in the house. Something isn't right, and the guys can feel it. Arthur is trying to defend himself, saying he doesn't support the Germans, but McNasty isn't letting him off the hook and keeps probing. It turns out that they didn't notice the German officer hiding under the floorboards. Everyone is tense until the officer starts shooting and manages to hit Arthur, his son, and a few of the soldiers before running away. Seeing him running, Hawkeye gets the German in his sights and takes him down with just one bullet. Now only 3 soldiers are left from the Filthy 13. The wounded German soldier tries to stay confident. McNasty just shoots him in the leg and the rest follow. But before they could kill him, McNasty stops him and leaves the German to die through bleeding out from his wounds. Back in the present, Chris is shocked by the amount of death and killing that Hawkeye had to go through, and even worse, be awarded a medal for it. But they didn't want to kill. They were just following orders and trying to put food on the table for their families. Later that night, Chris and Jessica are in bed together and talking about how these soldiers have no support after having to go through such brutal battles for everyone else. He suggests writing a book, and Jessica thinks he should be the one to write it since he used to write stories when he was a child. The next day, Chris brings Jessica to see Hawkeye, and he's curious about how their first date went. But it was actually magical because he got her flowers, and they spent the night drinking champagne and looking at the stars. Hawkeye and Jessica bond over dead relatives, and he tells them the story about how he met his wife. It was back in 1941, and he loved her after seeing her smile and wrote to him every day when he went to war. Then he pulls out his Medal of Honor, and they are amazed to see it, but he didn't get the medal for anything he did up to this point. Back in the war, Hawkeye and his crew are still in France's beautiful countryside, inside a castle that is working as a military hospital. Hawkeye and what's left of his crew are there, and they talk about the things they miss back home. McNasty is talking about how one of his men pranked the other by putting a fish inside his mattress, but what they didn't know is that the German military has been keeping an eye on the hospital and are trying to come up with the best way to attack it. They decide to use stealth and take out the soldiers quietly. There is one soldier standing guard, and when he comes by looking for a source of the noise, the German comes up behind him and cuts his throat. Inside the hospital, the nurse is looking to move some beds and give the soldiers some medicine, but since it's busy, he says no. That's when the German soldier comes in while the doctor is getting some meds into a vial. He sneaks up behind the doctor and uses a syringe filled with a liquid and sticks the doctor in the neck with it. Meanwhile, the boys are in their rooms when they hear screams coming from the hospital. The Germans are slowly making their way through the halls when one of them gets caught by Agnew, and the rest got into a fistfight against the German soldiers. Agnew got his man, but Hawkeye got bested, and the soldier also got Agnew, but he got back up and held his own. McNasty is fighting outside when Agnew is in the room choking out the German soldier. Outside, McNasty managed to grab a gun and shoot the soldier he was fighting with. When Hawkeye came out, he couldn't find the last soldier. Then he hears a scream from a distance and walks towards it. He then finds the soldier holding a nurse hostage. Hawkeye is trying to talk him down while the German is threatening to kill her, but just before he could shoot her, Hawkeye gets a shot off and hits him in the head, saving the nurse in the process. Later, Hawkeye was looking at a picture of his wife when the others came and got him. The planes are flying outside, taking the boys back home, away from the war. Hawkeye then tells Chris and Jessica he never liked killing anyone and never got a rush like other sliders did, and even if he got a medal for it, he always hated what he did in the war. He only felt good when he had his wife with him. Chris is honored to have heard these stories, and Hawkeye leaves him with one more thing. The only thing a man thinks about on his deathbed is not about the battle, it's about the people he loved and the ones who loved him back. Chris finally gets the courage to tell his dad that he doesn't want to go join the army. He loves Jessica, and he wants to stay with her as much as he can, rather than go off to war. Richard also comes clean about lying about a football injury to avoid going to war too, because he had met Karen was pregnant with Chris that same week, and he made the choice to stay behind and take care of his family. He also tells Chris to take care of Jessica and lead their lives together. Sometime later, Chris finds Hawkeye on his couch, but he doesn't hear Chris calling his name. Chris checks on him and realizes that he's actually died on his couch, after finally getting to tell his story from his perspective. At the burial, everyone is there hollering Hawkeye for the person he has been, not just the soldier that served his country. Chris then learns that Hawkeye had left his Medal of Honor to him because he was the only one to sit down and listen to him. As the movie ends, Chris and Jessica are laying on a picnic blanket with the book Chris wrote about the life of Hawkeye and the Filthy 13. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.